When you look into the eyes of a dying person, or you look into the eyes of a horribly injured person, those eyes, they become the voice of that person.
Don McCullin began his wars in the poverty of 30s North London. His father died early because there was no money to cure him. Don carried a massive chip on his shoulder. He roamed with violent street gangs, and it was this picture of some of them, called the Governors, that launched his career in the early 60s.
Strange enough, I became a photographer through the death of a policeman, because where I grew up as a boy, the policeman was murdered in a gang war. I wasn't there that night. So you could say, in a way, my life's work was somehow conceived with violence, when the word goes.
Ooh, Lordy, trouble so hard. Ooh, Lordy, trouble so hard. Don't nobody know my trouble but God.
McCullin got all the violence that he could handle and more in a succession of wars from Biafra to Vietnam to Beirut. He was something of a driven man, taking more risks than most took in order to get closer to the suffering and the dying.
Ooh, Lordy, trouble so hard.
His pictures were dark, too dark for some tastes. What he saw affected him more and more. Unlike some of us war journalists who can by and large leave our experiences behind us, he was increasingly weighed down by his work.
Coming back from that rawness of those wars, destroyed me partly as a man, really. I couldn't be normal anymore. I couldn't see the world through normal eyes anymore. I was possibly, 7/10 of the near to madness as you could kind of care to think about, really.
In the early 80s, he escaped into the remoteness of a Somerset farmhouse where he still lives, but his life continued to unravel. While his first marriage was collapsing, his wife developed cancer and died. For more than a decade, Don McCullin felt he needed to stay away from places of mayhem and destruction. That's until a few months ago.
I was sitting around here in Somerset with nothing particularly to do, and I missed the old days when I used to go on international stories when I worked on newspapers. I missed that cutting edge of going to front lines and bringing back images of situations that were not right. So when you start reading about 15 million people dying in the next 9 to 10 years, if that can't motivate you, I can't imagine what would.
What had happened was that he went back to Africa for Christian aid in order to photograph victims of AIDS. The idea came from him. The charity said they couldn't afford him, and he said he didn't want to feed. Taking pictures of doomed African lives was as harrowing as anything he'd done before.
The moment you walked across the threshold of those rooms, you smelt the death of the person you hadn't even seen yet, because they're often lying in very dark rooms on the floor, covered in many grubby old blankets, often soiled, hiding, horrible ulcers and breathing death. We're talking about they suffer from thrush, TB, and AIDS, all compacted into the same dying bodies. I've been away from the war scene for several years, but the moment I was confronted by death, it was like, something that was every day to me. It took no time for it all to come rushing back and suffocate me with the same hideous image.
What McCullin most enjoys these days is landscape photography, though not the lush views of summer.
I prefer to photograph in the winter. That's why my landscapes are sometimes accused of being war scenes. But I like standing in the naked English winter countryside, alone. And I feel totally uncontaminated by guilt, because all I came away with from those wars was just a huge cartload of guilt.
Ooh, Lord, trouble so hard.
Don McCullin says he's not an artist and wishes his photographs could be exhibited at bus stops rather than in a gallery. At 66, he's still restless, still haunted by the ghosts of the dead and the dying he caught in his lens.
Ooh, Lord, trouble so hard.
Gabirado, ITN for Public Television.